So, what I want to talk about tonight is this bizarre Talmud that we find in the book of Brachot. Brachot is the first book of the Talmud, and it talks primarily about Brachot. We know that in Jewish life, when you eat something, you make a blessing before that. There's 6 different blessings you make before foods. There's 3 blessings you make after foods. And there's a lot of details and a lot of different foods. Some foods are like in the murky area between different brachot, and a lot of discussion regarding that. But it also has at the end of the book, it talks about dreams, like 4 or 5 pages about like what are the interpretations and what do you see this in your dream and that in your dream? What does it mean? And all these very interesting things. And tucked like in the whole dream discussion on page 57, you find the following statement. And I'm going to read it to you. I can say it b'ivrit in Aramaic, but I'll give it to you first in English. And I teased this once before. 3 themes are a measure of the world to come.
That's in Hebrew?
That's in English first. Shlosha me'ein olam haba. There's 3 things that are me'ein, are like, or a measure, are in some way similar to olam haba. Right? Olam haba means the world to come. We'll see if we can learn some more about it. Right? Some other world. Okay. What are the ve'eluhain? And these are the 3 things. Shabbat, Shemesh. Shemesh means the sun, and Tashmish. Now, Tashmish is an ambiguous word. So the Gemara asks, what does the word Tashmish mean? Tashmish demai. Which Tashmish are we talking about? I mentioned this in Ben's house. Yeah, before Pesach.
Yeah, okay.
I teased it. Yeah.
Tashmish.
What does it mean? Sexual relations?
Right.
It's a biblical, it's not...
Nobody uses it.
I don't think it's in common use.
Well, I don't think so.
What does it mean in regular? Illegal.
Yeah, so it's the Talmud asks, the Talmud says, wait a minute. Tashmish has multiple meanings. So Gemara asks, Tashmish demai. Which Tashmish are we talking about? Ilema Tashmish hamita. We'll get there, yeah.
Okay. Calm down.
If you'll say perhaps it's Tashmish hamita, which means intercourse, sexual intercourse, that can't be, says the Talmud, ha-mikchash kachesh, it makes someone weak. Mikchash kachesh is the Aramaic, the same language that your ketubah was written in. It means to make someone weak, exceedingly weak. Okay. Ella tashmish nekavim. Rather, it must be going to the bathroom.
Does it mean specific like defecation or just in general?
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Yeah. Okay. That's the Talmud. And if I just told you this, I say, here's a sampling of Talmud. Is this written by some of the world's greatest geniuses that we've ever seen? Or is this a bunch of gibberish? I don't know. You might, if that's all you knew about the Talmud, you might have that question.
They all might have lived in Colorado at the time. I don't know.
It sounds like a very strange statement. Oh, yeah. We're talking about this idea, this core central idea to Jewish belief, this Olam Haba, this other world that exists. We don't know a lot about it. There's not many definitions in all of Jewish literature about what this world is. We'll go through them maybe today. But, the Talmud is instructive. Like, we're trying to convey a message. Like a group, of 1,000 rabbis 1,500 years ago, when they signed off on the final text of the Talmud, which was edited multiple times, they decided that this little, 2 lines should be for posterity, right, included in the Talmud. It's obviously teaching us something. But what it's teaching, there seems to be no manual. It doesn't say, well, what this actually means and what the lesson is and what the connection is. It seems very bizarre. And you know what? This is an example of what we call Agadita, or Agadic Talmud. The Talmud is split into 2 sections, or 2 modes of instruction. You have halacha, or shmaitza. I'm saying 2 words, by the way. Anytime you say 2 words, it's because the Talmud is written in Aramaic. Thus, there's the Aramaic word for everything and the Hebrew word for everything. Like the word Talmud, we're all familiar with that word, right? Talmud, we all know the word Talmud, right? But who here has heard the term Gemara or Gemara? Everyone's heard of that as well? Well, what's the relationship between Talmud and Gemara? It's the same exact thing. Gemara is in Aramaic and Talmud is in Hebrew. Right? So halacha means law in Hebrew, and shmaitza means law in Aramaic. So the half of the Talmud, the vast majority of the Talmud is law. So like the laws of Shabbat very detailed laws. The laws of brachot, the laws of damages, of interpersonal. You find a lost object, or two people are quarreling over an item, or just all the details. We have lots of laws in the Torah, 613 mitzvahs, and lots of details. And not all of them are spelled out, and lots of law. It's a book of law primarily. And then every once in a while, you have a little piece of Talmud that's called Agadata, which means it's philosophy, it's lessons, it's ethics, it's ideas that are coming to teach you how to behave in your life or what to think about, philosophically, intellectually, ethically. And what you find with the Agadata is that mode of Talmudic construction is almost exclusively written in the form of stories or allegories or euphemisms or metaphors. It's always shrouded. It means the clear intention of the Talmud is not just written out blatantly. It's always hinted to. It's like this. And this is a great example of a piece of Talmud, a piece of Gemara, where it's teaching us something about Olam Haba. So it's clear it's about Jewish philosophy. Olam Haba is not practical to us, in our lives. It's some other world that we're not privy to. So it's obviously philosophy. Okay, so this is Agadata. This is that kind of Talmud where the true intent of the Talmud is shrouded. And our job when we study that is to try to understand it.
So this is my question. So the Talmud, right?
Yes.
It's intended to explain or to clarify, right? The non-written part of the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they leave things like this where nobody knows actually what they meant at that time.
Well,
so at that time they thought this is so clear that nobody would actually.
So like this. No.
Then everybody explained the Mishnah, and then everybody explained the explanation. And then,
no, but it's designed to not be understood. This is all by design. It means the intention of the authors of the Talmud when they wrote halacha, law, was to make it as clear as possible. And if you study Talmud, any page of Talmud, you'll see how the questions and the analysis and trying to get to the core of the details of the minutia of all the law is exhaustive. Yet, that's clear that's the intention, to get to the bottom line. And sometimes it's so confusing because it keeps on asking questions and analyzing and from every single angle because it wants to get to the bottom line. It wants to get to the law. Yet here, deliberately, it was meant to be shrouded. And the question is, why? And there's a few answers. I like to say that the deepest secrets of Judaism are not dispensed like gumballs. You don't put a quarter in and say, right, and say, I want wisdom. Let me sit back on my hammock and smoke a cigar and drink a beer and get Torah wisdom, or Torah philosophy, the deepest things. It's like people start to go to Kabbalah Center, right? They want to learn the deepest things about Judaism, but they want to wear those red strings. You've seen those red strings, right?
This one.
Oh goodness! So you think that you wear a little red string and it does anything for you,
What?
You think that if you just go to a basic rudimentary Kabbalah 101 class, you're like an expert in all of Jewish mysticism. And that's not the way it is. And the Talmud clearly says these are the wisdom, the secrets of Jewish thought. We're not going to make it easy for you to understand it.
Yes, but at the same time, I feel, for example, the Ten Commandments, right? They're so important, so critical.
Yes.
It's okay, this is it. I won't put it in a weird discussion between two rabbis, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is it. These are the 10 laws. They're so important that I will spell them out clearly and without any more than it should. So if there is, this
no, but
it's really important. You want to convey the message.
But Diego, there's an assumption baked into your question, as most of your questions have an assumption baked into it, and that is that there's any sort. I guess so. Okay, and that is that when the Talmud says these kind of ideas, it's debate. There's never any debate in Agadata. Never. There's never a single debate. When you find the debate in the Talmud, it's all in law. This, it's not debated. It's just said, it's put out there, not explained. There's no footnotes or anything like that, and you're on your own to try to figure out, to decipher it. So it's not about debate. It's there. It's all there. It's just it's hidden. It's telling us something about a very core idea of Judaism, Olam Haba.
But the entire interpretation is debated.
Or maybe there's multiple layers of interpretation. Remember, it's not law. You don't have to behave in a certain way. And we have, I'm sure Ben 2.0 could tell us maybe of I always do this to him.
Yes.
But we have the idea of shivim panim b'Torah, right? There's 70 facets of Torah. That's one idea. Another idea the Talmud says several times that the Torah is compared to a stone that you take kipatich yipotzetz sela, like a patish, a hammer destroys a rock, and when you take a hammer and you hit the rock, lots of shards going in all different kinds of directions.
I want to say Tommy.
Well, it's brought down in 3 places in the Talmud. One place in Kedushin, one place in Sanhedrin, and the third place, I don't remember. 3 places, and what's that? Yeah, and that, by the way, that particular Talmud happens to be another great example here, guys. I'm sorry if there's like so many introductions. It'll be 9:00 and we'll lose Jeff, and then I'll say, "Well, we're about to start." So I'm always worried.
Won't be the first one.
Sometimes when the Talmud tells us agadata, it takes one lesson and divides it into 3 parts, and scatters these parts on different places in the Talmud, thus ensuring that only someone who is so well versed in the Talmud that they actually have encountered these 3 puzzle pieces and had the presence of mind to realize that these were pieces that have to go together, only that kind of person will actually get the lesson. It's genius. It's like what they did it's like encryption. Like the only way for someone to know is if you have the keys, and therefore you take one lesson, you divide it into 3, and then someone might not even know that. Like you'll read it and you say, "This doesn't make any sense." Like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. It's just one part of the puzzle. You have to have multiple pieces to make the one picture. So that's another example of how this form of Talmud is sometimes shrouded. Right? The intention is clearly not present at face value. Did you find it? Yeah. What's actually interesting about that particular piece of Talmud that Ben is looking for is that it brings this in 3 different places, and 3 different places it explains the verse in 3 different ways. The problem being is that the same author, Tanu de Rabbi Shmuel, the same author saying the same verse in 3 different ways, which is impossible because one of the core elements of Talmudic exegesis, which is the fancy word of saying, nothing to do with JC. It just sounds like that. It's one of the core principles of Talmudic exegesis, which means like derivations, is that you can only use every verse for one law. So thus, one verse equals one law. If you have 3 verses and you have 3 derivations, it must be that 3 different guys and 3 different ways to use the same verse. Thus, if you find 3 derivations from the same guy, you have a big problem. And what's interesting about that particular...
Didn't they kick him out?
Who?
Rabbi Shmuel. They kicked him out. He said, "You're right. You're being too weird."
I don't know. Is that the story?
No, it's...
Well, Tanu de Rabbi Shmuel, it's not Rabbi Shmuel himself. It's the institution of Rabbi Shmuel.
But he was the one that was kicked out.
I don't know. I remember that. Which was that? You get mixed up with Eliezer, or am I getting mixed up?
Whoever was asking all these weird questions.
Maybe.
They said, "Just leave."
Just get out of here.
Just
There's the door.
yeah.
What happened last time I came to the Torah study?
Okay, so that's what we're going to try to decipher. We're going to try to take this Talmud. I'll repeat it again for you, Miriam. We'll take the Talmud and we're going to try to deconstruct it and use other sources from all across Jewish literature to see if we could maybe perhaps understand what the heck is going on in this particular bit of insight. And it says that we're talking about Olam Haba, which means an alternative universe or a different universe or an upcoming universe, different world. And the Talmud says it's compared to 3 things. 3 things are a measure of the world to come. Number 1, Shabbos, the mitzvah of Shabbat. Number 2, Shemesh, which means the sun. And number 3 is Tashmish. And the Talmud says, well, what does Tashmish mean? Either it means Tashmish Hamita, which means intercourse. The Gemara says, no, it can't mean intercourse. That makes someone weak. It must be going to the bathroom. And thus concludes the Talmud with no more insight or instruction for us to maybe gain some sort of understanding of what exactly is the lesson being conveyed. So that's what we're going to try to do. What do y'all say?
Okay.
So what questions do we have? Tom, let's try to organize our questions. Well, the first question is, what's Olam Haba? It means Olam, which means a world, Haba, which means upcoming world. What does that mean? When do we get there? What happens there?
I have a core question.
Yes.
Where in Judaism is the first source for saying you will actually live when you physically die? Because from my understanding, that is a pretty new idea, which probably came in from...
Didn't the Rambam say that?
Rambam had the
Even the Rambam, if he does say it, if you know the source, I would consider him late. Only
no, the Rambam, no. So it's many, many, many times in the Talmud. But in fact, the Talmud says this is in the...
I'm not talking about because I'm not talking about a lot of...
No, it means verse in the Torah.
It's physically, you die, but you continue.
Tchiyat HaMeitim?
No, okay, so between when you die.
So your question is in the intercession between...
Where the sources appear, this Rambam.
Well, I'm saying the Talmud, many places in the Talmud talks about that.
Do you think in the intervening period between death and resurrection? Yeah.
Well, all the Jewish people were resurrected, right?
No, but the significance of that time is actually not. We kind of overthink the importance. Like everyone's like, "Oh gosh, what happens after we die?" Everyone's like, that's maybe the most exciting question of all.
So basically, what I'm trying to ask is that a Jewish idea, or
yes,
they're heading towards that. The Jewish idea is resurrection and all.
Yeah, well, the Talmud has discussions just off the top of my head in Sanhedrin 91a and b. Well, there's a cat in the house. I assume that's yours. That's okay. That's one of the, if you remember, Ben, that's one of the discussions that Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, otherwise known as Rebbe in the Talmud, he has an argument with a fellow by the name of Antoninus, who is none other than Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. According to arguably, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, the Roman emperor, we know he was a Roman emperor, that we know for sure. Which one? But likelihood that it's Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, who assumed emperorship in the year 161. And of course. And he had a debate with Rabbi Judah the Prince as to how there could be culpability for the body and the soul once they're separated. So he deals with the fact that, well, the body can be punished because look at the body. I'm nothing without the soul. I'm like a rock. I'm totally immobile, totally useless. And the soul can say, look at me. I'm flying around like a bird, right? I'm not harnessed. I don't have the tools to implement my will. So therefore, how could there be any retribution? How can we be held accountable for any of our deeds or misdeeds, right? Positive or negative, because the soul can't be punished or rewarded. The body can't be punished or rewarded, because look at them each independently. Independently, they're each useless. Look, the soul can't accomplish anything. The body can't accomplish anything without the other. So that was the question Antoninus asks Rabbi. And Rabbi responds, Rabbi, he's just called Rabbi because of his significance in Jewish history. So Rabbi responds and tells him that there was a king who had an orchard full of beautiful young figs, and he hired 2 watchmen to watch.
Yeah,
one's blind. There you go. You guys know this. One's blind and one's lame. And then they conspire, the blind one and the lame one. The lame one says to the blind, "Hey, I can see these beautiful trees. Why don't you just yield to me right, and I'll direct you, and we'll go and we'll eat the trees." And they go and they hop. The blind guy, the lame guy hops. The lame but with vision hops onto the blind guy, and he directs him, and they eat all the fruits and whatever. And then the king comes back and says, "Where's the fruits?" And the lame guy says, "Look at me. I can't walk. Clearly wasn't me." The blind guy says, "Look at me. I cannot see, but clearly wasn't me." So what happens? That's what the so that's what Rabbi tells him. So he tells him, "Listen, you know what the king did? He takes the blind guy. He puts him. He takes the lame guy. He puts him on, piggybacks onto the blind guy like they were, and he judges them as one. So too, God takes the soul, reinfuses it in the body, and judges a man as one. So indeed, there cannot be judgment of a soul without a body and a body without a soul. So that's also a kind of the imagery of resurrection. But just to finish this point, 1 second, if I may. To finish this point, the Talmud, the Mishnah, even way before the Talmud, Mishnah says that gives a list of the people that have no portion in the world to come. Right? All of Israel's portion will come, and these are the ones that don't have portion will come. And one of the things that it includes Ha'omer en tchiyat hametim min haTorah. Someone who says there's no resurrection from the Torah, from Torah-itic sources. And the Talmud says, well, what do you mean? Where's the source? The Talmud reads, I believe it's between 15 and 25. I lost track of how many sources it brings from the Torah, that the Torah itself, not anything later that could be invented by rabbis and some conspiring, cynical conspiring rabbis want to make our life miserable. None of that. From the Torah itself, that resurrection, thus the continued viability of a human soul and body after death from the Torah.
But these are two different things. Resurrection is one, and the other one is the eternal.
Olam Haba.
Yeah.
Yes and no. Nowhere is there a manual for deciphering this. However, it's very clear. Like, for example, I'll tell you an example that I found. I know we're getting way off topic, I know, but is that a problem?
No, I'm asking.
Yeah, okay. The Talmud says, well, what's the rationale for saying that someone who does not believe in in resurrection from the Torah did not have a portion of the world to come? The Talmud says, because, hey, he says it doesn't exist, so he doesn't have a part in it. Clearly linking those two together. Now, how it works, I don't know. That's a question I don't know. I don't think I found anywhere where it says, where it seems likely, this is just my interpretation, that from just studying all the sources, that resurrection happens at some point, some future point, I don't know when, but after that, that's when the judgment would be, the ultimate judgment. And somehow that is going to transition into Olam Haba. You cannot say that that's Olam Haba itself, because Olam Haba, very clearly, there's no bodies. And resurrection clearly is bodies. So when the body is shedded, I have no idea. I don't know.
But the way it talks about Olam Haba is that we're just going to be souls.
Okay, so let's see what the sources say. Ha'olam Haba, ein bo lo achila, velo shtiya, velo yeshiva, velo amida, ela tzadikim yoshvim, va'atroteim berosheim, v'neni meziv hashchina. That's from the Talmud in Berachos 17, which means as follows. Olam Haba, there's no eating, there's no drinking, there's no standing, there's no sitting. Rather, it's just righteous people that they're sitting, I guess, and their crowns are in their heads. Means their crowns are not on their heads. The crowns are in their heads, which is also very interesting, very bizarre use of term. It doesn't say crowns are on top of their heads, so the crowns are biroshem, which means that they're...
Inside their head.
Yes. What that means, I don't know. It's just bizarre use. We typically think of a crown on top of a head, not in a head, right? Whatever. And they take pleasure they enjoy the pleasure of God. They bask in the pleasure of God. V'neni meziv hashchina. That's one of the definitions that we have for Olam Haba.
But it's clear that it takes place after the resurrection and not in the intervening period when we're just disembodied and just haven't resurrected yet.
That seems very abundantly clear. Yes. Thus, when someone dies, I like to consider where they are as being like a holding cell, so to speak.
Is there any decision on whether people would retain individual self-awareness or consciousness after
Yes,
death?
well, that's
or
the soul.
Or is it like you just go to sleep and then the alarm wakes up and you're at the judgment?
No, it seems very clear that the consciousness continues. Absolutely. That's why we can have what's called Gan Eden or Gehenna, or we're pivoting into a really different subject. What happens after someone dies? Well, one of three things can happen. Either they go to heaven, they go to hell. Those are two fantastic options. And the worst option is reincarnation, what we call. Now remember, what I'm saying right now is not agreed by all Jewish opinions of philosophy, but it is the overwhelmingly mainstream opinion. Maimonides would not agree with us, but Maimonides is kind of on an island in this issue. It's very, very clear from the major philosophers in Jewish thought that this is the structure. So when you die, one of two very good things can happen. Either you go to heaven or hell. Hell is not a permanent. We always get mixed up with the Christian understanding, but it's not a permanent destination. It's like a kind of like a power wash, or your car's a little schmutz. You go to
Roman Catholic purgatory?
I don't know anything about Roman Catholics. All I know is what the Talmud says. Hey, there's a maximum of 365 days, and it's like a car wash for the dirty car, but your soul is essentially fulfill this purpose, and you don't need to be reinserted in another body to go for another round.
So then you would go to heaven.
And then you go to the heaven, which is a very glorified. I think it's a way you're just waiting. You're waiting for ultimate purpose and ultimate judgment. Good and bad.
And why is reincarnation considered the worst?
Because reincarnation means we like it. Like to us, that's the best option. Hey, we get to do it one more time. We get to be around our friends and have a social reality. For us, we kind of think of that being the best option. But when we say it's the worst option, we're talking from our soul's perspective. Our soul loathes this world. Our soul cannot stand being in such close proximity to a body. They're opposites. It's the most disharmonious marriage of all time. It's like, in fact, the Midrash says in I believe it's in Decode, in Midrash Tanchuma, that the soul, every second the soul wants to escape the body. And if not for God kind of continually commanding the body, the soul to remain in place, it would just abandon any second. It can't stand it. It's torture for the soul.
Then why do we thank God every morning saying thank you for returning my soul?
Because we are more than just a soul. The better question is, why is God screwing us by having our soul be here? Right? That's essentially the question you're asking. Because that's our opportunity. Because it's opportunity. And even though we know that our soul is miserable here, we cherish the opportunity to become great. Means the second our soul moves on, there's no more opportunity, right? The second you're dead,
you are wherever you were.
That's it. Whatever you accomplished, whatever you got. Whatever you didn't get, you'll never be able to get that back. So a mitzvah is a success that we can only have as a human. Thus, every second that we hear, we have to cherish because of the value that it has in the opportunity that it affords us. So for our soul, if we were to isolate our soul, the soul, remember, the soul starts off life being super pure. The Talmud says that the second before a baby is born, they make him swear. Well, right. Where does it say that in Talmud?
Where?
I don't know where.
It's in Nida, the book of Nida, 30b, and a little bit later on.
Is anything not said in that page?
It's a very fantastic page. And a little bit later on that same page, it says that the second before he's born, they make him swear, make a child swear. What do they make? What's the nature of the oath that a child takes before he's inserted into the world? Tehei tzaddik v'al tehei rasha. Be a tzaddik, be righteous, and don't be wicked. And you should know that the Almighty is pure. The angels are pure, and the soul that you have is pure. Right? And your job, if you preserve it in its purity, then good. Im atam mishamra b'taharata mutav. If you preserve the soul in its purity, great. Ve'im lav, and if not, harani not lamim, I'm going to take it from you. I'm going to kill you, basically. Right? Thus, from the beginning, from the inception, the soul starts off as being 100% pure. And then it's inserted into the body and into a world where it's so ripe to get sullied, to get smushed. No, smushed. Thank you. Smushed. To get dirty and to get blemishes. So from our soul's perspective, it's better to not be here. However, that gives us a life and an opportunity.
I have a few questions.
Yes.
By the way, a lot of this material I've never heard.
Oh, yes. But this, remember, and I want to tell you that whatever I'm telling you right now, besides for the reincarnation little bit that we got off, it's all in the Talmud. It's not something which is sourced in some Kabbalah of dubious origin. This is from the mainstream perspective on Jewish life. That's been part and parcel. No, I'm saying, no, I didn't say that. I said it's not in Kabbalah or of the government. Turn back the sun. No, I'm not. God forbid. But the Zohar is not for everyone. It's not for public. 40. It's not for public consumption. It's not.
It's amazing.
Are you 40?
It is absolutely amazing. Well, I'm 21, celebrating my 22nd anniversary, 23rd anniversary of turning 21.
Oh, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So, question number one
Yes.
is, as far as the soul, I thought it was divided into, I guess, two parts, the animal soul and the godly soul.
Well, Well, in fact,
Or maybe it's
we're,
more
we're
parts, but I don't
right.
know.
Once again, we're getting closer into the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah talks about 5 different parts of the soul, right? Neshama, Ruach, Nefesh, Chaya, and Yechida. What that means, I have literally no earthly idea. I have no idea. I know that exists. I don't know what it means, and I know that Talmud doesn't refer to a soul as having this multiple parts. I don't know. I assume I've never seen it sourced anywhere. I know that this exists. Whatever. That was the first question. What was the second question there?
So the first question is you don't know. Okay, second question.
No, I said that this idea about what it means.
You have the
Yes.
animalistic soul, you have the godly soul, and the two.
And the idea of these 5 levels.
But you're saying that's not the Talmud. That's only Kabbalistic.
I haven't found it. I didn't study the whole Talmud, but I haven't found it. I'm pretty sure it's not there.
Okay.
Second question is with the soul. I guess. Okay, let me start over. The angels. What is an angel compared to a pure soul?
Well, an angel, we look at an angel as some sort of spiritual force that it is comprised of just intelligence or just spiritual reality in a way. Not having any body, but we do find slight stories in Genesis that talk about angels taking up the form of a body to achieve a certain goal. Like if it's telling Abraham, we're talking to Sarah, or whatever.
Right. So wouldn't a soul down here be more have more potential than up there?
Oh yeah, of course.
So why would a soul not want to be down here?
Because
to earn more potential?
It's more potential, but it's also potential for regression. Right? Because of soul, if it starts off as being 100% pure, well, it could, when it comes and now it's mixed with the body, so it in itself can't improve, right?
What, the soul?
The soul can't improve. The soul
So
could be
when
preserved. Remember, what does it say? What's the oath, right? If you preserve your soul in its purity, great. If not, I'm going to take away from it. It's about preservation, but if a soul preserves itself, essentially, remember, the soul and the body are mortal enemies, right? They don't coexist at all. So in order for the soul to preserve itself, the body has to compromise. Thus, the body becomes perfected. Thus, essentially, we could argue that the structure of the challenges and the conflict that exist in our lives is my soul going to get sullied by my body, or is my soul going to remain pure, thus perfecting, purifying, fixing the body? Elevating, right, making it right.
So it's something.
Making the body more soul-like.
So
Yes.
when you're
Making the body less of an inhibitor or an opposite. 100%.
So when you're doing a mitzvah, you're not elevating your soul.
Oh no.
Elevating that.
Oh, because that's you're on levels. And
It's a common misconception, but I think it's a common misconception that we're elevating our soul. Our soul does not, remember, our soul starts off. What's the first thing we hear about the soul? The soul starts off its life as, I'm saying, the first thing in the child's life is that it's pure. On what level of purity? God's pure, the angels are pure, the soul's pure. It does not need to be purified. It's pure already. Sometimes it could get sullied, and then you got to kind of undo the damage. But a soul starts off as being super duper duper pure. It does not need to be improved. The body, however, is designed to be the exact opposite of that, right? All of our instincts are counter the soul, right?
okay.
And that's where the tension exists.
Then I might getting two things mixed up. Then. So like a Saudi, right?
Yes.
They're theoretically perfect or whatever the case may be, but a person like myself has more potential than Saudi. Right?
More potential for what?
The
Well, you have more room to run, is that what you're saying?
No, to actually go to a higher level than the Saudi.
Why is that?
Because I have more. I don't know how to explain it.
So from a Kabbalistic perspective,
Like, is
it's
it
a
better
correction.
to make a mistake? Like, he's saying it's better to make a mistake and then fix it. To try
Well,
and
we have another source for that.
Smash it off and stuff.
The what?
That smashes off and cuts.
No, it's the Talmud says, "B'makom sheba'alei tshuva omdim." You guys know that I'm not bluffing this, right? Right? I said it last week? Sorry. I don't remember saying this last week. I said it last week? So let's say I said it, I'll say it again. In the place where Ba'alei Tshuva, those that repent, sinners that repent, where they stand, afilu tzadikim gmurim einam omdim. Even people that are totally righteous, that have never sinned, they can't stand at that place. So yes, there's a certain element of someone having greater potential or more ability once they've kind of seen the dark side, if you know what I mean. Let me give a tangible example of what I'm saying. So, who would sorry, I'm taking my jacket, guys. Getting a little sweaty here. Who would who in Jewish life? Pull up the sleeves. Also, roll up the sleeves. Who in Jewish life? Who's the greatest man that ever lived? Moses. Okay, so what do we know about? So if we were to analyze Moses' soul, and every little piece of literature we find about Moses' soul, we would find maybe a lot of what it looks like when a man is, on that level. So we'll get to a little bit more later on in detail. But we find in the Midrash, so the word Midrash, everyone's here heard the term Midrash? Midrashim. So the Midrash is a collection of Talmudic era teachings that were organized in different Midrashic books on the Torah. The biggest one is called Midrash Rabbah, which means the biggest Midrash. That's what it means. So when people quote a Midrash, most often they're quoting from what's called a Midrash Rabbah. So there's one on Genesis, Exodus, right? Berachos Rabbah, which means Berachos or Genesis, the biggest Exodus, Leviticus, etc., etc. So Devarim Rabbah, which means Deuteronomy Rabbah, is the Midrash on Deuteronomy. And all the way at the end of Deuteronomy, we find the death of Moses. So all the way at the end of the Midrash in Deuteronomy, we find what the Midrash says about Moses. And we find a very interesting narrative about the death of Moses. And it talks about, God says, okay, Moses, time to die. Oh, okay, well, there's more backstory here. So time for Moses to die. So what happens? Right, God sends an angel to come take the soul of Moses. And what happens? The soul says, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. Now, we already spoke about the fact that a soul cannot stand existing, subsisting in a body. It can't stand it. However, Moses, because he's the greatest man that ever lived, because he perfected his body to such a degree that the soul was in complete harmony, and it says, this is a good enough place. I'm fine here. I'm at ease here. And then there's a whole narrative, and God says, okay, not this angel, well then the bad angel, the Samach Mem angel, and he sharpens his knife, and he comes, and Moses fends him off, and Moses kind of makes a laundry list of his accomplishments, and he kind of outmuscles the angel, and then God himself comes, and God says there's a narrative, a dialogue between God talking to Moses' soul, and God says, Biti, my daughter, come, I have a good place for you. And the Moses' soul says, there's no more preferred place in the world than in the body of Moses. Just an example of Moses made his body, means his soul was so pure and was not sullied by the body because the soul instead influenced the body, and the body became less and less and less of a hindrance or of an opposite to the soul, and it became such harmony that the body and the soul were almost indistinguishable. They were both at the same soul level of the way it was. Angels are pure, God's pure, the soul's pure. Well, Moses' body was also pure. And therefore, the soul had no problem of existing within Moses' body. Now, let's bring this full circle here. What happened? What do we know about Moses? Like, what do we know about, so we talked about the story of the golden calf, right? What happened? What's the aftermath of the golden calf? Well, okay. What happens after that? Right? It's right. Moses is coming down from the mountain. Well, okay. After that, Moses coming down from the mountain. Right, and then he has this whole thing. He says, "I want to see." He wants to see God. God says, "Well, stand in the little cleft in the rock."
Oh yeah.
And then God says, "We can't see me. A man can't see me and live." Kilo Yohane Adam V'chai. And then he sees the bat, whatever that means, okay? It's filling, okay? And then it says Moses came down, and the people couldn't look at him. Who remembers that part?
Yep. That's where his face shone like the wear of the mask.
Yeah, no.
Moses comes, and he's the people, his face was so bright. That's the mistake. Karan means his face had a countenance, had a radiance. His face had a radiance, and people could look at him. So to put on a mask. And for the rest of Moses' life, which is another 39 years, Moses wore a mask on his face at all times, besides when he went to the Olam Haba.
Was it the frowning one or the happy one?
I don't know. Now, well, that's in the Torah. The Torah makes it clear. The Talmud says, I believe it's in...
Yeah, I think he had the one. Yeah.
The Talmud says, Pnei Moshe... And I'm always looking at you, I'm trying to finish the Talmud. Pnei Moshe... The face of Pnei Moshe Kipnei. Anybody wants to guess? It was only 4 words.
I don't know.
Pnei Moshe kepnei chama. The face of Moshe was like the face of the sun.
Oh.
Of the sun.
So here's the second thing.
I don't know, man. That may be. Right? You're jumping the gun here. But Moses, because his soul was not stymied and stifled and muffled and muzzled by his body, because his body was like soul-like almost. Thus, the full power of his soul came forth. So what happens when you have a soul shining right at you? It's too bright. It's beyond the capacity of bodies to consume or to absorb or to relate to. So Moses is at such a level where his body is not opposite to his soul. Thus, the soul can penetrate through. Thus, what happens? People can look at him because they're looking at a soul, essentially. And they're looking at a soul, they just couldn't handle it. It's beyond their capacity. Now, what's another thing that we see that's
They
in
were
our...
resurrected.
Well, that's earlier. They just try to look at him, they have to look away. What is another thing, by the way? What's another thing that in our world that if we look at it, we have to quickly look away? The sun. The sun. So, and we skipped to number 2 here. We're told that Olam Haba is like the sun. There's one thing in the world that's me'ain. It's a measure of the world to come. Perhaps we could say that the sun is something which is beyond the capacity of us, so long as we have a body to comprehend. We cannot have an interface with it. You look at it, you got to look away. And Moses was almost completely soul-like. Thus, the Jewish people can't look at him because they can't have. There's no interface that a body has with the soul. Right? There's no way of interaction, body and soul. Just like we have no way of interacting with the sun. So, and Olam Haba. So, what does it tell us about Olam Haba? Olam Haba is a world where we don't have bodies; it's just souls. And thus, essentially, what the Talmud is telling us is that if we want to know where, it's giving us a hint about what Olam Haba is. It's giving us a hint, and it says it's me'ein Olam Haba, that the sun is me'ein Olam Haba. What it's telling us is just like the sun is beyond the capacity of a human, when the human is deprived of body and soul, to absorb and to have a relationship, a interface with, so too our Olam Haba world, where it's just souls. There's no standing, there's no sitting, right? There's just souls, right? We're stripped of the body beyond our capacity. And I want to just highlight here, what are the words of the Rambam? How does Maimonides describe Olam Haba? Someone mentioned, Jeff mentioned the Rambam. So I found like this. The Rambam compares Olam Haba and our complete impossibility of understanding it to a blind man trying to understand what color is. Like if you told someone, hey, someone blind from birth, say, okay, I want to describe to you what green looks like. So Ben's wearing a green shirt, right? Ben 2.0, right? And you say, like, listen, green is very luscious. Grassy, to feel grass. Well, that's green, but the sky's blue. It's nonsense to them unless you've experienced it, unless you've had some sort of life experience that you could call on. You will have no idea what you're talking about. Like there's no way, there's no verbiage you can use to describe it. It's beyond your capacity. You're blind, and vis-a-vis the spiritual reality, we're blind as well. But it's like the sun. We can't look at it. Another thing here. When he talks about the spiritual pleasure, and he takes it a step further. The spiritual pleasures are so far beyond the physical pleasures that we cannot, unless you've experienced it, you have no way of even describing it. You don't have the life experience to even articulate a definition of it. Just like we cannot have the relationship with the sun. Yes, shoot.
When he came down the first time,
yes.
he didn't have this.
No, I don't think so. No.
So why did he have the second?
Well, what happened in the interim?
Oh, he saw the God's back.
Well, yeah, but Moses seized an opportunity, seized with an S-E-I-Z-E-D or S-E-I-E, I don't know which one it is. Moses grabbed onto the opportunity, right? But in the interim, Moses, he interceded on behalf of the Jewish people, right? He sacrificed personal greatness in favor of the Jewish people, Right? He took the luchot, he smashed them, and he started the prayer, and he says, well, what do the Egyptians say? And then he said that the 13 attributes of mercy. Right? Moses grew from that time. Moses changed. Thus, Moses reached his full-blown potential at the end. So yes, Moses changed from the first ascending from the mountain to the third. Absolutely.
So my question,
Yes.
leading question. You said the second segment is all about, well, Olam Haba has nothing to do with body. There's no body whatsoever. So that brings to the third one, defecation.
Well, we haven't done the first one. We haven't even done the first one. Let's do. I know. I skipped ahead because of the Moses. So what about Shabbos? So what do you find to hear about Shabbos here?
Wait, can you finish the story?
Which story?
Where Moses,
We're the chosen people.
how God pulled Moses' soul back?
Yeah. So God. Well, I plucked out the part of the story. It's being called out here. I plucked out the part of the story that I wanted to say. There's a continuation of the story. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I know, but what is it?
I don't remember the exact details, but
It'll take 5,000 years.
no.
She cut you
Well,
off
it's yeah. It's
Okay.
I don't remember exactly. I don't know exactly what happens, but Moses dies in this very kind of spiritual. Back to the Talmud. This is in Berachos 8a. The Talmud talks about there's 903 different kinds of deaths. 903. This is, once again, it's not from any Zohar or anything like that. It's from the Talmud.
And that's an Oscar is the worst.
Askara is the worst, and Neshika is the best. And the Talmud compares Askara. How's Askara compared to? Like if you have thorns. No, thorns.
It's eventually what happens when you get rabies, where as if someone's pulling ropes out of your throat.
Well, the Talmud compares it to
Thorns in the wool.
thorns in the wool. Right? You have the thorns and the wool. You want to separate them. Right? The body and the soul, they got very knotted up together. The soul influenced. Instead of the soul influencing the body and purifying the body influenced the soul. So the soul and the body are so intermeshed. To separate them is very painful. Right? Just like you want to pull, you have little bits of thorns that get stuck in the wool, little bits of wool that get pulled out with the thorns. It's a very messy separation, as opposed to the best kind of that's called neshika, which literally means to kiss, and that's compared to like plucking a little hair out of a glass of milk, kind of very smooth, and it's totally harmonious. You're thinking about the milk that has the glass. Is that what you're thinking about?
No.
But it's
I
very
prefer
smooth.
my milk without the.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I like to clean you.
So God tells Moses, "You'll die with Mises Neshika," and he finally accedes. But the fact that his soul was at such comfort, in such a good place in his body, was a reflection of how he had perfected his body to such a point that it made it a welcome environment for his soul. So Shabbat is a measure of the world to come. Why would Shabbat be considered a measure of the world to come? What about Shabbat is unique or special or somehow has an overlap to Olam Haba? And what does this teach us about Olam Haba?
Don't they say it's like 1/60th of the world to come or something? Or on Shabbos is 1/6 or 1/60th.
Well, sleep is 1/60th of death.
Yes.
Yeah, but Shabbos is
Maybe.
1/6 or
Maybe. Well, what does that mean?
Well, so it's giving us a taste of the world to come because it's the day, because the rest and the work, and it should be a delight, rejoicing time, but a time of rest as well.
So what are you saying?
So the world to come, there's
Because I feel like you're tiptoeing between two of the reasons. I have wrote here down 4
Wait,
reasons.
how do you celebrate? Because you said Shabbos is going to be the world to come.
I didn't say that. I said Shabbos is something. There's an overlap that Shabbos is a measure of the world to come. There's something similar in Shabbat that teaches us about Olam Haba. So I have 4 of them, and you're kind of vacillating, straddling both of them. So let me say it and tell me if you agree.
please,
Okay.
please.
So who here has heard of the idea that this world is a 6,000-year world?
Yeah.
Haven't you heard about that?
Yeah, we have 200 years left.
Okay.
157.
Where does that come from?
71 or 2?
5774. 5775.
575.
Well, it could be sooner if we do everything right.
Right. So we've all heard that. In fact, this is once again substantiated in the Talmud. If I'm quoting the Talmud many times. 2,000 years of Torah. 2,000 years of Tohu, 2,000 years of Torah, and 2,000 years of Mashiach. Tohu means chaos. So the first 2,000 years is chaos, then Torah, and then Mashiach. So I have a whole class on what that means. Either way, we have the 6,000 years, and then there's the 7,000 year. Then there's the Talmud also goes and say, well, the 7 of 7. Okay.
Just like with
And ki elef shanim be'enecha. The verse, I think it's in Tehillim, tells us that 1,000 years of God is like one day. It means 1,000 years for us is like one day for God. So essentially, the model that God enacted for the world, 6,000 years of this world, and then the 7,000 year Olam Haba is very similar to 6 days for God, and
that's what you was tippy toeing around.
And so 6 days. So the 6 days of God, they're a microcosm of the 6,000 years of us, and the 7,000 years. That's just the ones. What does that mean? Okay, so that doesn't tell us a lot about what the nature of Olam Haba is. It just tells us, okay, the structure is very similar. But maybe we could go a little bit deeper. So we find this is once again from the Talmud, and I think it's an Avodah Zarah.
I have a question.
Yes.
The whole thing.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
The dinosaurs.
No. So do we know how the world will end at the 6,000?
How what?
How the world will end? Or will it just be all the souls will go up and whatever?
It doesn't seem like is it an end or is it a transition?
Yeah.
I don't know. We don't know many details. We talk about the idea of Mashiach. So we think Mashiach as a man or as an idea, but here it says it's 2,000 years. It's a process. It's obviously not one. There's no 2,000-year-old guys out there, right? Are there? I'm not familiar with any. Right? No. It's a certain process, right?
Too slow.
So how is this going to be? We don't know. And anyone who says they do know, right? Tipach rucham shel mechashvei kitzin, the Talmud says. Right? It means that they're just fooling themselves, right? They're just causing agony and anguish and stress to themselves because they're trying to do calculations and machinations and trying to do use textual and literary machinations and chicanery to try to understand when's the Mashiach coming and whatnot. We don't know. So I don't know the question. The correct answer is I don't know. So I don't know. Does that derail everything?
No, yeah, my point, there is enough details on how the whole thing was created, but I was wondering if there are sources for how the whole thing will be.
Isn't in the Torah, doesn't it give us a hint of...
Yes, there's a lot of hints, but how to actually take this, and what's said clearly is don't try to do this because you won't get anywhere.
It's not calculating when he comes, but understanding what's going to happen.
Okay, so what's going to happen? So... there's a debate in the Talmud between Rav and Shmuel.
Exactly.
There's a debate in the Talmud between Rav and Shmuel. What's going to happen? And according to the Rambam, who's the authority in this issue, who's the one that collected all the sources about Mashiach and whatnot, he says, "Ein bein olam hazeh le'imot Mashiach ela shibud malchut b'lvad." There's no difference between olam hazeh, this world, and imot Mashiach, and the days of Mashiach. Ela shibud malchut b'lvad. Rather, it's just the subjugation of the kingdoms alone. That's it. That's the only difference. What does that mean? I don't know. But clearly, that's the opinion of Shmuel. The only difference between this world and the days of the Mashiach is subjugation to the kings or to the kingdom or to the nations alone. That's it. So not much is going to change.
That goes back to what Yeshayahu says when he talks of in chapter 53, 54. About the nations of the world going, I can't believe what I heard, and all. Yeah,
so it's going to be a certain. I think it's a certain consolidation.
Right? Is the subjugation of who? Of the Jewish people or all people?
You tell me. I would think if I had to bet, I would think of the Jewish people. Right. These are the lines.
Okay, so I told you I'll derail the whole thing. So now we can go back to Shabbos.
What about the years? How did they count to the 1,000, 2,000?
How is it? Well, the years all start from Adam.
I don't know how the years counted.
Years are counted from Adam. We don't know what happened before Adam. Those 6 days, we have no idea. what happened or what the length is. We meet the sun on day 4. Well, what was day 3? What were the demarcations of a day? How do you organize time on Earth without the sun? I don't know. That's the correct answer, right? Those 6 days are a mystery. We have 31 verses in the Torah about them, and we know nothing more.
But they may not actually be days. They could be
Well, clearly they're not standard days like we have. That's absolutely abundantly clear. Why? Because there's no sun till day 4. Number one. Number two.
I've seen actually, if I may, a calculation based on when the theory of the universe, how it came out to be, right from the Big Bang. There was enough mass in a small region of space. The universe was small, so gravitational forces are very strong. And relativity tells us that when there is enough gravitational force, there is the concept of dilatation of time.
Yes.
Time dilation. So the time is counted in a different way. So somebody actually, a physicist, did the calculation of the mass of the universe at that time and so on, and counted the days.
That's a physicist who, by the way,
wait.
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about his name is Schrader, right?
Schrader.
Gerald Schrader. Or Schroeder.
No, that's Schrodinger's.
That's something different.
But the interesting thing
That's
is
the argument.
No, but
go
he's trying to, actually, he believes...
He's trying to make
very
compatibility.
observant, actually.
Yeah, he's trying to make the compatibility.
And what
Genesis,
he
he wrote the book Genesis and the Big Bang, right?
No.
Schrader is...
But there are many people. But he did actually a calculation that I follow.
Yes.
Because I know
Based on
something
time
about
dilation.
relativity. And what you find is that when you count all the time, actually in our years, it's about 14.5 billion years, which is exactly what people predict that
Well,
the
they
universe is.
say 13.8. But what's
Give or take,
what's 700 million years amongst friends, right? Nothing.
Well, no, the thing is that those are actually very, imprecise.
It was 15.4, now it's 13.8. It's imprecise.
But for
it's within the same
for
ballpark.
physicists, that's a very precise thing going.
That's a ballpark.
Yes.
Ballpark figure. We'll take 40.
So it was actually very close to what. I mean, it could have been.
This was written
10
in
million.
the 60s. This idea was first developed by a rabbi, actually, a German rabbi. His name was Rabbi Schwab. He wrote this before everyone. Right? There's a book publication before anyone came up with this idea of trying to show the compatibility of the scientific model of the age of the universe. Oh, well, we can argue about this
in
later.
the 60s, this theory that he was using was not developed yet.
Well, it's based on Einstein,
though.
no?
Later, because you had who were the two guys that made the light?
So there was
That's 65.
So that was in the 60s, right?
Well,
They had
in the 60s,
expanded universe.
in the
Ether, they were
60s,
testing ether.
two-thirds of the scientists believe that the universe was eternal.
In the
In the 60s,
in the late
even
50s.
the early 70s, scientists still believe that the universe was eternal. Two-thirds of them. They made a survey. So
The survey was in 1959.
After this, they discovered radio expansion. They developed the inflationary theory of the universe and so on. Because if you extrapolate back, there are problems of the horizon, which you can see based on causality. But if you go back, then they have to develop this inflationary theory. So anyway, these kind of came after. But the interesting thing is that when you use the most modern theories of the universe, they kind of agree with the 6-day if you account for relativity. So anyway.
Yeah. But back to your question.
Time dilation from the universe.
Back to your point. We count our world from atoms. Once all that's done with, that's when we start.
One common question I get is, what about the dinosaurs? How do you account for that?
What about them?
Well, they're obviously older. Scientifically,
There's two.
What is the word?
No, there's two different approaches. There's two approaches.
That God's testing us.
No, that's the third approach. I'm not even going to talk about that. That's
There are
two other approaches.
In the 6th day, they say Tehnim,
What, the big lizards or something like that?
which is big reptiles.
Big reptile.
Yeah, but wait a minute.
So that's one theory. The one theory is that these are the Tanim HaGedolim that are referred to in Genesis, and they died in the deluge, in the flood. And the argument goes that
in the flood. Noah's flood?
Yeah, Noah's flood. That's right.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of
The movie?
the species died in the flood. Right. And the argument is that. Sorry, go ahead.
Kasuto
Who's
argues
Kasuto?
that the Talmud was actually a word from Bulgarian.
The what? What does that
I
mean?
don't remember. I thought you were.
No, but I
No, it's basically from the ancient Middle East and like way back
a word for what?
for some kind of species.
That's
Yeah.
actually why we had you come out here tonight, was to answer that one specific
Yeah.
question. That was really the main
So
reason.
if those are dinosaurs and they died in the flood, well, then maybe their bones were artificially aged by the flood as this very cataclysmatic event with all the sulfur and the heat and the water and the whatnot.
How do you age anything? From my understanding, they can't age anything past from the flood back. And how do you age the earth or any bones that you do find anyway? Because
Right,
the age
that's
of the earth when it was created.
well, that's
How
one
old is
theory.
Adam?
That's one theory that the dinosaurs existed, for 4,000 years ago, and they all died, and they look older to us because of the events that happened. That's one theory. Another theory is that no, they existed, and the world's been around for billions and billions and billions of years. That's still compatible with Genesis. Those are the two
You didn't know what to
theories.
say. That was the sixth day. Cosmologically.
Yeah, however you're going to work out that.
But this notion that the dinosaur bones were put on Earth by God to trick us or test us or something like that.
I think that's a cop. It's a cop out answer. I think you have to deal with the reality, and yeah. So I don't understand. Means the fact that dinosaurs exist. Why does it have to be in such? That's only if you stick your head in the mud, so to speak, and take a very literal approach, which we don't do, especially not with Genesis. Clearly, we have 31 verses. We don't have the full picture. So if you take a very literal approach to Genesis, then you're a fool. That's what we say. Maimonides himself writes that, by the way, in his treatise on reward and punishment that we're referencing over here. He says, if anyone who takes the words of Chazal, so Talmud, takes them literally, they're a fool. I don't even want to talk to them. They're much worse than the people. Like I say that the guys, the creationists, quote unquote, those guys are much worse because they're presenting the Torah in a backwarded, archaic manner, where it's like it's backward. It's not at all willing to accept even the most widely accepted tenets of science.
They take everything so literal.
Yeah, who says the Torah is literal? I don't get it. Who says that every element of the Torah is literal? We know that it's not.
So who says so?
No one says so. Only the idiots.
That's what we're saying in creationism.
Yeah. So we have the Talmud, and we have the instruction to know what is what and how to understand things, and we have Talmudic statements that are clearly not literal. It talks about in Baba Basra. It talks about the waves that are 300 mil, and each mil is 400 parsos. We're talking about thousands of miles of in the air waves, and the tip of the wave is fire. Clearly, that's not literal. That's a lesson. That's not obvious. And what happens to the sun at night? Where does it go? Where does it hide at night? Another Talmud.
Yep.
It goes to sleep, right? Just much smaller.
I think that's an answer.
It's what
It goes
that's
out, and that's where the moon comes from.
that's what Calvin's
It's not
dad
on fire
told him.
anymore.
There in our Friday night service, isn't there something that talks about that?
And what says that God sees to create.
No, the prayer of the sun living life. Well,
By Chula Shemayim V'Aretz V'Chol Tzom, where God finished creating the heaven and earth. Is that what you're talking about?
no. Well, isn't there some kind of line about God moving the sun or moving the sun to the sky or something like that? Is that what you're talking about, Ben?
Okay, Shabbos.
I'm sorry. I was
your
going to look it up. Isn't there some kind of line about God moving the sun to the sky or something like that?
Yes.
You have a good time here, Yael?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
This is new to me.
A lot of new stuff here, I know. Yes,
I
right.
just think that's a general statement about making the sun move to the
Yes.
sky, making the sky.
So when the Messiah comes,
moving
they
the
say
sun and the
the only
stars.
difference between now and then
Yes, no subjugation.
is subjugation. That seems very negative.
Why is that?
Seems very contrary to everything.
Subjugation of kingdom.
Well, what does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean subjugation of kingdom? Who's the king?
That's what you say, kings and nations.
Well, that's probably the simplest understanding, but as we know, it's highlighted very often throughout, let's say, the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur liturgy. We talk about the king that exists within each and every one of us, and that's our Yetzer Hara, or our evil inclination. So maybe what it means is that the only difference between Olam Haba, Ela Shibud Malchus Bavad, is not referring to the kingdoms, the government, so to speak, but it's referring to the internal king that we all have that dominates us and that hinders us from doing what our soul wants to do.
I got to go. Tomorrow I want you to tell me about defecation. Defecation?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little personal. Most interesting part.
So, yeah.
I got a prayer for it.
Yeah.
There is one.
There is one for
Yeah,
you. Done.
So, back to Shabbat. We good?
We're good.
Okay, so we said the first thing that was Shabbat is perhaps Olam Haba in the microcosm 6 to 7, 6 days of God correspond to 6,000 years of us.
Next week we're having it. I I don't have the Google Drive. Do you know where it is?
Next week.
Yeah. Go send me the info. Next week I'll still be on.
So that's the what we said is. 1 second here. So that's the first thing we said. Now I want to say like this. We find again the Talmud in Avodah Zarah. So we were sorry. The Talmud says as follows: Mi shetarach be'erev Shabbat yochal b'Shabbat. Mi shelo tarach be'erev Shabbat mehechan yochal b'Shabbat. Which means as follows: he who toils before Shabbat will eat on Shabbat. He who does not toil on Shabbat, what shall he eat on Shabbat? So what happens? So Shabbat is a day of consumption. Work. So Shabbat is a day of consumption. One of the things that we cannot do on Shabbat is cook. All right? Or prepare, but to cook food. So if you want to have hot food on Shabbat, when do you have to make it? Before Shabbat. And that's the dynamic. And we know that if in a Shabbat observant home, it's always very hectic. Right? Because you have a deadline that everything has to be done. All the lights have to be set, all the kids have to be bathed, everything has to be done before a certain point of time. And then as the clock strikes Shabbat, the mode just changes. Now it's about, okay, now you're enjoying what you worked so hard to achieve. And the Talmud says this, and it's not just telling us about Shabbat, it's telling us about life. You know, this world, compared to next world, is very similar to Friday to Shabbat. This is the world of action, of activity. Now we could accomplish. Now we could earn, we could create, we could work, we could produce productivity. Olam Haba, remember we said that once you don't have a body anymore, it's just the soul, you cannot improve, you cannot accomplish, you cannot achieve. All you have is what you did beforehand as a human. So this essentially tells us not only about how Shabbat is very similar, because if you think about, well, what's life? Well, life is Olam Hazeh, and then there's Olam Haba. Well, what's the difference? The difference is that Olam Hazeh is work, you're creating. Olam Haba is consumption. That's where we say that's the ultimate destination, reward and punishment. That's one thing it tells us. But what does it tell us also about the nature of reward and punishment? We think that reward, what's a reward? So the kid gets an A, you give him a lollipop. He gets a D, you still give him a lollipop. If he gets an F or whatever, you give him a little smack, right? In our perspective, every reward is separate from the activity that produced that reward, right? You do well in school, well, then you'll get something else. The Torah compares the reward of a mitzvah as preparing and consuming. Like you prepare food and you eat that same food. Right? It's a certain reality. We view a mitzvah as creating a spiritual reality that is consumable in a spiritual world. Right? Just like you take the flour and you make bread, and what do you gain from the bread? Like, well, what's your reward? Well, your reward is the bread itself, right? That you produced. It's producing a certain thing which is consumable. So too, a mitzvah is producing a spiritual reality that you're going to consume. Well, who needs to eat that? I'm not hungry. Well, yes, you're not hungry now, but imagine you live in a world where all you have is a soul. And the soul needs to be sustained and nourished as well, just like a body does. But what sustains the soul? Could you give it pizza? No, Olam Haba, there's no eating, there's no drinking. It's not about giving it pizza. But it has to eat. Well, what does it eat? It eats spiritual food. What's spiritual food? How do you make spiritual food? Where are the recipes? The Torah is a massive recipe book. All different kinds of spiritual foods. We even have it. It's said it very clearly in the Torah itself. Ki lo alechem levad yichya ha'adam. Man does not just live on food alone. Right? You have to have the Word of God. Right? What it's telling us is that there's a certain part of our physiology, our reality, that needs food, but it can't eat bread. It can't eat bread. Cannot eat bread. Cannot eat bread. It has to have another kind of bread. And, well, how do you get that bread? Right? Shabbat. Well, you want to make food for Shabbat. Well, what do? You got to prepare food before Shabbat. Okay, so you want to eat Olam Haba. Well, what are you going to do? You got to prepare food before Olam Haba. Well, how do you prepare that food? By doing a mitzvah. Mitzvah is a recipe that produces something which is consumable in Olam Haba. And I'll give a little cherry on top here.
Rabbi Chaim Luzzatto said that a reward for a mitzvah in this world is another mitzvah.
Well, it's not Rabbi Chaim Luzzatto. He's quoting that.
Him?
That's a Mishnah.
Was that the Mishnah?
Yeah, Rabbi Chaim Luzzatto
I don't know where it
was
is.
born in 1707. The Mishnah was codified in the 2nd century.
I was
1500.
quoting it then because I read it somewhere.
He quotes it, yes. He quotes
read it
it.
somewhere
He's-
from him.
and he might quote it, yeah. So that's a Mishnah.
Okay.
That's schar mitzvah 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 goreret mitzvah schar mitzvah mitzvah, right? It's a thing. I'm not questioning the validity of your statement. I'm just,
No, I
yes.
so, but thank you though.
But let's find a different Mishnah.
Wasn't this year you cook on Shabbos, right?
Well, you cook on holidays.
Because Yom Kippur fell on Friday. So you had to have a meal for Saturday. Or maybe it fell on Saturday.
Yom
You had to have
Kippur,
the
Yom
double
Kippur this
portion.
week. Yom Kippur this week was on Saturday.
Yeah, so then you have to cook on
You can never cook on you cook on Friday for after
You need
fast.
like a double portion or something. I don't remember.
Oh, that's what you have to cut up, right?
No.
What if Yom Kippur fell on a Friday?
Yeah, I don't think it ever happens.
Doesn't happen.
I don't think so.
Why?
Doesn't happen, right? La'adu Rosh, exactly.
What?
So,
Does that mean
Rosh Hashanah cannot be on a Sunday or Wednesday or a Thursday or a Friday. Yeah, doesn't work. Doesn't happen like that.
And what?
And that's very complicated laws of Jewish calendars and the exact length of a lunar month and the exact length of a solar year and how they interrelate and whatever.
I believe
Complex mathematics. So I'll tell you guys another cherry on top here.
So, but just real quick. So this year it was not.
It was on Yom Kippur was on Saturday this week on
I
Shabbos.
recall that like there was like some kind of where you had to prepare a meal.
Yeah.
I don't.
Tell me exactly what
We
you.
want to know the cherry on top. Don't worry about it.
So this is a cherry top that I think that our Hebrew speakers will appreciate much more than our English speakers.
Oh, you're lucky, bro.
So we find like this.
The one that matters.
We find the following statement in the Talmud, in the Mishnah. Following statement in the Mishnah. Al tihiyu ka'avadim hamishamshim et harav al manat lekabel pras. Ella tihiyu avadim al manat shelo lekabel pras. Which means as follows. Do not serve God like a servant who tries to get a reward.
Yes.
Rather, it's like don't do it without the intention of reward. Right? It says the word pras. So if we know Hebrew a little bit here, the word pras is different than the word schar. How, Ben, would you define the difference between the word pras and schar?
Schar is more like a salary.
Like
you work,
as opposed to a pras,
and pras is something.
like a prize, it's something random. When the Mishnah says, don't be like a servant that serves God in order to get a pras, it doesn't say schar, it says pras. What it's saying is, don't think that the mode of reward in Olam Haba is in the form of a pras, where it's something external to what you did. Rather, it's schar. It is schar. Schar mitzvah b'hai alma letter. There's no schar mitzvah in this world, right? But don't think that it's a pras. Why? Because what is the reality of a reward for a mitzvah? It's the mitzvah itself. Because the mitzvah is the recipe that produces the spiritual food that you eat on the Shabbat. Well, not the Shabbat, but the Shabbat of Olam Haba. And that's what we're told that Olam Haba is similar to Shabbat. There's a lot going on over here. It's the idea of a microcosm, 6+1. It's the idea of creating versus consuming, but it also teaches us a lot about the reality of a mitzvah, what it produces for us. So essentially what we're doing, what we're finding here is that this one obscure piece of Talmud is actually telling us a lot of very interesting things, provided we have the background and the information to assemble to create the framework for actually consuming these tremendous insights. I want to say another thing here. Olam Haba, so Shabbat. See, Olam Haba is compared to Shabbat. I want to say perhaps, what did the Rambam tell us? Remember we saw the Rambam said that Olam Haba, you can't explain it. It's like a blind person explain color, right? Unless you've experienced it, experiential. If you haven't had the experience, well, you can't actually define it. I want to argue that Shabbat is the same thing. It's the same model of being experiential and not being explainable. And I talk to people who observe Shabbat, and most of them love it. And you say, well, what about Shabbat is so wonderful? We talk about oned Shabbat, the pleasure of Shabbat. Well, what's so wonderful? You're just sitting around and you're not doing malacha. Well, what's so pleasant? Well, you got to experience it to actually understand it. Most Jewish ideas are rooted first and foremost in understanding it. Right? It's very much a cognitive first religion. Here, Shabbat is the opposite. Shabbat's like Olam Haba. You want to really understand Shabbat? Well, you got to experience it. If you haven't experienced it, well, then you're blind. I can't describe to you what color is like if you haven't actually experienced color. We find an example of this in the Talmud. There was a discussion between a Caesar, which means a Caesar, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Chanina. And he asked him the question why is the food on Shabbat, why does it have such a wonderful aroma to it? So he says we have a special spice. It's called Shabbat. Special spice. We put the spice in, and that's why it tastes so good. So he says, give me some of it. So what does he say? If you observe Shabbat, well, then you can have that. Then you can have that spice. If you don't observe the Shabbat, well, then you cannot have that spice. It doesn't work for you. So what it's telling us is that even with regards to the simplistic things of Shabbat, like the food of Shabbat, it's special because of something that you got to experience. There's no way to even describe it. Just like Olam Haba. Olam Haba, you want to understand it? Tell me, define. Well, no, you can't. You're the blind person. You're the deaf person. You're the person who has not experienced this. Well, then you can't understand it. So just like Shabbat we're told about Shabbat that you have to experience it to understand it. Olam Haba is the same thing. That's another comparison. And lastly, this is my favorite one. Well, no, they're all favorite, but
They can't all be favorite.
they're all favorites. So, like my kids.
Best friends?
Yeah. So we find like this. So what happens when we do a mitzvah? Better yet, what happens when you're really thirsty and you have a glass of water? What happens?
Watch it.
What do you feel?
Satisfaction.
You feel good. You feel relief, right? You feel relief. But you feel a lot of things. Well, you feel you're no longer thirsty. It's wonderful. The feeling of drinking the cold water and goes down your throat, and it's wonderful, right? We
finish and say, "Oh, was I thirsty?"
Yeah, I was so thirsty. Now, what happens when you eat matzah? What do you feel?
Dry mouth, constipation.
You feel like you're eating crackers. What happens when you shake a lulav? Right? The mitzvah, lulav, and what do you feel? You feel awkward. Why?
I like the smell.
If you're
Yeah,
doing it, you look
but
weird. Yeah.
you feel like you kind of hope that your coworkers don't see you. Like, I'm holding now like a palm branch and the myrtles and the whatnot and the citron, and I'm shaking it in different directions. Right? That is the reality of this world. In this world, we feel our body. We feel the agenda of our body, right? The good, the bad. When we're hungry, we feel. When we need food, we have food. Well, you feel hungry. If you haven't studied Torah in a month, you don't feel anything. You feel just fine. Our experiences, our feelings are linked to our body, but not to our soul. In Olam Haba, it's the exact opposite. We don't feel a body. We don't eat. We don't need drink. We don't none of that. It's just the spiritual world. All we feel is our body, right? Now, if we're going to understand what's like, well, Olam Haba is so distant for us. It's like everything's upside down. In this world, where we have the body and the soul, but all we feel is the body. And the body's in the driver's seat, the soul's in the back of the trunk, right? Banging in the trunk. It's that's what we feel in this world. Olam Haba, well, all we have is a soul. All we feel is a soul. And if we were to do a mitzvah in this world, so a mitzvah in this world, we do a mitzvah, we feel weird. Our body doesn't make any sense. We're eating matzah, we're chewing crackers, we're shaking. What's it called? We don't feel hungry before we study Torah. Like if you went 12 hours without drinking, you will feel hungry. If you go 12 hours without studying Torah, you feel nothing. You feel fine, perfectly fine. Olam Haba, all you feel is your soul, right? And if you were to do a spiritual activity in Olam Haba, would that feel natural or would that feel awkward? It would feel very natural, right? And in fact, even the thought of doing something physical is totally non-existent. So the reality is completely changed. Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. There's one mitzvah that we do in this world that we feel very natural doing as well. Shabbat. What's Shabbat? Right? What's the core of Shabbat? Shabbat meal. what do you have? Like we're told on Shabbat you have to have wonderful meals. Like if you have a steak, you see a steak in the store on Tuesday, you got to buy it and save it for Shabbat. And then if you see even a better steak on Wednesday, you got to buy that one. And no matter if you always have to buy the best for Shabbat. Right? And then what happens? What happens Shabbat? You have all the delicacies in the world, right? And what happens? What does your body feel on Shabbat? Right? You're digging into that steak. You're like, hey, I can do this. This is okay. Shabbat is the one time, the one mitzvah that we could get somewhat of an inkling of what the reality is in Olam Haba. Just like our bodies are so eager to get on board on that steak, we want to dig into the challah, like you see challah, mounds of challah. You're like, like your body's all on board. You feel very normal, very natural, very comfortable, right? Engrossing yourself in a Shabbat meal. It doesn't feel awkward. You don't feel like you're shaking the lulav, like, what am I doing? I don't know, right? You don't feel that, right? You feel at home. You feel at ease. You feel like you're doing something that you crave doing. And it's a mitzvah. That's a me'ain. That's a measure of the world to come. That's an example of what a spiritual reality is in Olam Haba. You feel right at home. Right? So for us to understand Olam Haba, well, we have to try to disassociate our body. That's hard for us to do. Right? But Shabbos is the one mitzvah that we could get somewhat of an inkling of what the experience is like, where the natural feeling of doing a mitzvah is, something that we're super comfortable with. Like we're there. We don't need to have to do what our soul wants, even though our body is protesting. That's that. Okay, so that's Shabbat. We see we brought 4 reasons why, or 4 perhaps lessons of this, lessons about Shabbat and also lessons about Olam Haba. The same, 6 plus 1, 6,000 years plus 1,000 years. 1,000 years of God of us is one day of God. Preparing for consuming. If you prepare before Shabbat, well then you could eat on Shabbat. If you prepare before Olam Haba, well then you could eat. And that also teaches about the consumption model of schar versus pras. Of getting reward versus a prize. What's the nature of reward for a mitzvah? Number 3, we said it's an experience that you have to experience in order to understand, just like that special spice. And lastly, that the same experience model, that just like an experience of doing a mitzvah on Shabbat could be something that you feel very comfortable with, it feels very natural, that is somewhat of an insight of what it's like to live in a reality where doing mitzvahs is very natural. That's what you crave. If you don't study Torah for 5 hours, you're hungry. You're craving it, right? If you don't do a mitzvah, if you're not running to, you're chasing the mitzvah like we would chase money. Like that's not a hassle. That's what you desire. That's what you crave. That's all you care about. That is an insight into Olam Haba. Yeah. Okay. So that's number 1. Number 2, we said is the sun. So someone already talked about that. Just like on a simple level, we can say, hey, the sun is clarity. Right. The sun is clarity. The sun provides light. Olam Haba is clarity. Everything's right. The reality of our soul and the kind of the breakdown of our existence, that becomes clear. That's a simple level. But on a deeper level, we already mentioned that just like the sun, you can't look at the sun. You have no interface with the sun. So too, Olam Haba is incomprehensible to us. We find several places in the Talmud the following statements. Kol haniviim lo nitnavu ela limot Mashiach. All the prophecies, we find wonderful prophecies. You mentioned Isaiah, but Ezekiel and Jeremiah, especially Isaiah. We talk about this future time, this wonderful time. That's only for Yimot Mashiach. That's only for the days of Mashiach. Aval Olam Haba, but Olam Haba, ayin lo ra'ata, and eye cannot see it. It's beyond us. And what's another thing? What's another example of something that our eye cannot see? Booyah. That's right.
The sun.
The sun. So we look at the sun. You want to say, what can we learn about Olam Haba? You know what you do? You go out tomorrow midday and try to look at the sun. You can't learn much. It's very, very distant from us. Additionally, another idea, perhaps, I think maybe it's honing into the same idea, that we're told, once again from the Talmud, this is in Sanhedrin, that in Olam Haba, the power of the sun will be diminished. We'll have a weaker sun.
Only like God.
No. Well, yeah, maybe that's what you would think, but that's not what it says. It says, why? Because the light of the tzaddikim, the light of the righteous, will outshine. It will be so much more bright than the sun that will render the power of the sun to be insignificant. So, i.e., the sun will not lose its power, rather its relative brightness compared to the brightness of the righteous will render it seemingly insignificant.
What's the source of this?
Talmud.
Why would there be a sun?
I don't know. If it's a spiritual reality, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer. Either way, that's the idea. The idea is that the state of an unleashed, if we know you're talking about the sun, the power of the sun, and the incredible force of the sun. How many times bigger is the sun than our Earth? Tens of thousands of times larger. It's an enormous, enormous power. It's 93 million miles away, and if it was a little closer, a little further away, we'd either be living on icicles, or or we'd be burnt to a crisp. We're at the sweet spot there of existence, right? The power of tzaddikim. We don't imagine the power of tzaddikim. Like what we're told is that the power. Yes, please. Yeah, thank you. I was trying to hint that when I was talking about drinking the water. But.
Maybe we want to go.
So unfortunately, we don't really understand the power of a mitzvah. We don't, because that's the reality of our state. But the power of a mitzvah is that it renders a state where if we were to just see it, it would outshine the sun. Like the sun would be nothing. What's the sun? It's nothing compared to the righteous. So obviously that's a visualization. Thank you so much.
I don't know how to make coffee, so
we know that.
Yeah. Or
so that's.
tea or
Bring me the pine.
a pine.
You need something harder than that. So that's, once again, and we see this manifest by Moshe. Moshe was able to do this in this world. Like Moshe didn't have to have. He didn't have to untether his body because his body was at such a high level that it wasn't at anything more. It wasn't hindering his soul at all. They were on par, so to speak. Let's move on to the last one. So Tashmish. So we see wonderful lessons. Shabbos, Tashmish. So there's a major problem with the Talmud. The Talmud does a lot of debate. The Talmud asks a lot of questions. The Talmud deals with a lot of issues. But almost never does it say a noun and not tell us what noun it is. It means here there's a dialogue. It says Tashmish. Well, which kind of Tashmish? Is it this kind of Tashmish? Well, no, this makes you weak. But that must be that kind of Tashmish, right? The Talmud could have just very simply said Tashmish Hamita. I'm sorry, Tashmish Nekavim, which means going to the bathroom. Why would the Talmud, if it's telling us a lesson, and three things are comparable to the world to come, right? Three themes, no more than that. So say thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3, and that's it. What does it say instead? It says thing 1, thing 2, and then something else. And we say, well, what's the something else? Is it this? No, it's not this. So it must be that. The Talmud could have just consolidated and say thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3, and tell us Tashmish Nekavim, not Tashmish Hamita. Just add another word. Why is there a dialogue in the Talmud? First you say an ambiguous noun, and then you have to ask the question, well, why this? Clearly, part of the lesson of what the Talmud's trying to teach us is borne out by the fact of what it's not on top of what it is. Does that make any sense? Should I repeat that?
What it's not.
Yeah. I'll repeat it again. Yeah, I can tell it was hard to follow. I had a hard time following myself. Maybe like this. If the Talmud very often has questions about things that it approaches. However, the questions are more like on not just on a definitional level. I'm saying, well, what does this word mean? That's a very kind of strange. Just say what the word means, especially if all you need to do is add one word, Tashmish, and then say Tashmish Nekavim versus Tashmish Hamita. If all the Talmud wanted to tell us was that there are three things that are a measure of the world to come, it would have said those three things. Instead, it chooses to not say those, to say two things, and then say a third word which is ambiguous, and it tells us that it cannot mean this, it must mean that. I.e., this is how I concluded when I said it previously. What it is not, i.e., intercourse, that's integral to the lesson. Thus, the Talmud wanted to say Tashmish, And then to have the question, well, which Tashmish are we talking about? Is it Tashmish Amita, intercourse? No, it must be that makes you weak. Rather, it must be Tashmish Nekava. What's the lesson? So it's something that going to the bathroom is, but that intercourse is not. Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of, I think we can theorize. We'll say, going to the bathroom, what's that? And intercourse, what's that? Maybe that's trying to create or trying to bring two bodies together. I think there's a lot of rooms, there's a lot of ways to go with this. I think we could also theorize, well, what's going to the bathroom? Well, that's removing waste. Well, Olam Haba is you remove the waste because you don't have a body. The body, if you think of the body versus the soul is pure and the body's waste. Maybe get rid of the body. I don't know. I think there's a lot of room for asking these questions. I don't know. I think I'm opening the door for a few different avenues here.
It might not necessarily be in order.
Oh, I don't think it is in order.
Is there any reference to when they were in the desert, Mana, getting go potty, right?
That's right.
So because there's no waste.
There's no waste.
So does this tie in any way or no?
I think it does. I think it does.
You can go potty. You can tell me as little as.
Why do you got such a big smile? He has a smile on his face.
You can go potty.
So
As a matter
When
of
your kids grow up, then you don't say.
and their clothes didn't wear out either.
Go potty.
Really high in fiber.
Yeah.
So they didn't go to the bathroom.
He's got little babies at home. So, if a child is born deaf, what language do they
Thinking.
think in?
I don't know.
You've seen pictures of that?
Yeah, but what pictures do they see?
What do they see in life?
How do they see the? Well, that's true.
They're
They're deaf.
blind.
Yeah. Blind. That's different.
Yeah, but they've never heard of what it was. Like he's talking about, they've never seen color. How do you describe it to them? If they never hear what it is, what language do they think in? If they're born deaf, it's a picture to them. They still know what it is. Like how? You're never taught.
Like, I would say bowl and nuts. And
The way
when
we're
they
taught
watch
to
you.
talk is because we hear
Yeah,
it.
but what language?
When we
Language
grow
is
up
sorry.
and we
It's
develop a palate,
It's a picture.
What
because
do
we
they? What
hear
do they
it.
hear? What do they dream in? What
If
what
they
language?
never
Pictures. They don't hear.
Sign language is different in each language, so whatever their character would teach them.
Well, either way, I don't know.
They can't hear. They never.
Why don't we ask them?
That's Israel.
I think the language is irrespective of the sound. Like you could read the language, right? Even if you're deaf. It's just what are
It's more difficult.
What
Uh,
it sounds like.
Sound it out.
deaf mute people that can't read? Illiterate deaf mutes. That's probably better. Let's go find some of
There you
them.
go. Sorry. Okay, so going to the bathroom.
Yeah, so go in the bathroom.
Yeah, I'm saying my point is that even they could speak English, or they converse, or they relate to the world in English. It's just not auditory, probably. That's what I assume.
So they just see the.
But I mean, the question is,
what?
what if someone doesn't have any association with any language? They can't read, they can't speak, or hear. So then, how do they relate to things? I don't know. It's a very, very curious question. I have some friends who like are families of deaf people. I'm sure, but I think that it's English. It's all English. They read English. They don't have
Unless they're born in
they don't
Israel,
have
then
braille for deaf people, right?
What's the question?
I don't know.
If a child is born deaf, that doesn't make no sense though. Because
What?
that has to go to your mind.
They see things in pictures.
No,
But she's
like
right
feeling.
with pictures.
No, the power of abstraction of a language is still there.
So a cat is a cat to them, but they don't even know how to say cat because they've never heard the word cat.
All right, can we go back to
But they can
this?
see it.
Right.
They
Somebody,
can
that doesn't
see it.
somebody that doesn't speak English doesn't know cat either. They say gato.
Exactly. So that was the whole question.
So the-
Language.
What does it have to do with
Why did you bring that up?
Yeah, I don't
What to do with going to the bathroom?
Because he was talking about seeing color and you can't describe it
Okay.
to a
All
blind
right,
person.
does
He's never seen
the
it.
mana tie into this conversation? That's good.
I think it does, because we do find some statements that talk about manna as being like the spiritual food. Lechem avirim. We find the Talmud says that lo nitz Torah la'ochlei aman. The Torah is only given to the next generation of those that eat man. I like that. We have to investigate that. There's room for investigation there. Either way, I like
Little
this.
plant in the desert. Is that the mana? You know what
No.
I'm talking about?
No, come on. It's not going to feed a nation of millions for 40 years.
When I was in
We're
Israel.
talking about billions upon billions of
So they
different
told you
meals.
that?
Yeah. They said when I was in Israel doing Wi-Fi, they pulling out the indigenous plants. And they're like, that could be mana. I think that's mana.
Remember, it has to feed a nation of millions for 40 years. So think
God
about
said
that.
it only
If
came
you're
to
talking
you.
about, let's say a nation of, let's say, assume conservatively 2 million people, we're talking about 6 million meals a day, right? Multiply that by 365. Well, let's do 369. Like no one counts on fast days and whatnot, right? Multiply that by 40 years. You're talking about billions upon billions of meals. You're not getting that from some foliage that you found on the grass, especially when it fell down from the sky.
We're all
And
grazing on,
Man, I'm just telling you what I
on
heard.
ragweed.
I didn't say it was right.
so like this.
Here?
I've never heard of it.
Because mana was just pure. It didn't have any waste. So when they
Your body just consumed it.
Huh?
Really?
Yeah, what's that face?
So, no, I'm yeah, well, yeah, it's cool. No, Brad said he never heard of it. Like, yeah,
That's very
very
convenient.
interesting.
And their
Yeah,
clothes never wore out either. That's a good
Yeah,
thing.
they
You don't have to buy shoes for 40
They didn't
years.
have to wash their clothes either.
Awesome. That's a good time. Next.
so we find the following like this.
How do you charge your iPhone?
We find another description, another definition about Olam Haba this is also in the Mishnah, and it says Yafe sha'a achat b'tshuva u'masim tovim ba'olam hazeh mikol chayei Olam Haba. Means it's better to have 1 hour of tshuva, of repentance and good deeds in this world. That's better than the entire life of Olam Haba.
Is that why you can't do euthanasia?
Can't do euthanasia because it's murder. That's why.
I tell you, because you're not giving that person that last opportunity.
No, because you're killing someone, right?
Yeah.
If someone can't say you could kill me because they're not proprietors over their own body. They're guardians.
That's why you cannot commit suicide.
That's right.
Yeah. Not
My mom says just someone commits suicide is a murderer.
right.
You kill yourself. You have no right to kill yourself.
So if John Locke.
Yeah.
So, and then we find also v'yafe sha'achat shel korat ruach b'olam haba mikol chayei hazeh, means that it's 1 hour of pleasure in Olam Haba is greater than all the pleasures of this world. Now, so what it's saying is,
Oh, keep going on.
what's saying like this: Olam Haba is a world of reward and punishment. Right? That's after everything, after the judgment. That's what we're consuming. And we're saying is the pleasure of Olam Haba is so great that if you take all the pleasure of this world, it doesn't equal to 1 hour of Olam Haba. It doesn't. There's no conversion rate. Now, additionally, we find this is Maimonides brings this, and this is a direct quote from Maimonides and his treatise on reward and punishment. He says as follows. This is a translation that I found. I think I don't remember if I found it or if I did it myself. I think I might have written this myself. So it's originally in Hebrew. It's actually written originally in Arabic, in Hebrew letters. But this is from his treatise on reward and punishment in the Mishnah, in the Pirush HaMishnayos. Right, the Rambam was the first to write a commentary on all 63 books of the Mishnah. In fact, he did it when he was a teenager, which is remarkable. He was the first one to ever do it. This is 1,000 years after the Mishnah had been written. And in the Pirush HaMishnayos, in the commentary of the Mishnah, he has an introduction to the second to last chapter of the book of Sanhedrin, which talks about reward and punishment, and he gives an entire treatise on reward and punishment, like pages and pages long. Very, very fascinating. So in it, he says as follows. We live in a material world, and therefore are able to achieve only inferior and discontinuous pleasures. Spiritual pleasures are eternal. They last forever. They never break off. Between these two kinds of pleasures, there's no similarity of any sort. What the Rambam is telling us is like this. Hey, listen, the world to come is a world of pleasures. Fantastic. This world has a lot of pleasures as well. Right? Like we talked about the drinking the water, a lot of pleasures, the ice creams, whatnot. all of them, it's fantastic. However, there's a difference, a qualitative difference. How so? That he says that the pleasure of the world to come, it's not like you have the pleasure, then you lose it. There's regression. There's bad aftertaste. There's a drop. It continues. As opposed to pleasure in this world, it drops off. You have the bad aftertaste. Right? You have the big ice cream and you have a stomachache. And even if you don't have the stomachache, well, you have the ice cream, but then once the ice cream is gone, well, the pleasure's gone, right? Right? So the pleasure is linked to the source of the pleasure, right? If you have the pleasure, then that's the reality of the pleasure in this world. Thus, let's read the Talmud again. Tashmish. Tashmish is going to tell us about this is in some way similar to the world to come. So someone says, wait, which Tashmish is it? Is it Tashmish Amit? Is it intercourse? No, that makes you weak. What it's telling us is that even though maybe we could safely argue the pleasure of intercourse supersedes the pleasure of going to the bathroom, which is a fair argument, still, it's not about the quantity of pleasure. We said that you take all pleasures in the world, it doesn't equal to 1 hour in the world to come. It's a totally different, but we're talking about the nature of the pleasure, right? What kind of pleasure? So we say that intercourse is not that because it makes you weak. Right? That is a physical pleasure, because afterwards, right, what do you feel? Well, you feel weak. You're worse off. That's an example of this world kind of pleasure. Is there one pleasure in the world that we could think of that has some lasting effect? That you don't feel worse afterwards than you did beforehand?
Sharon.
Go to the bathroom.
Go to the bathroom. I mean, I
Going-
oh, geez. Oh.
Right? Going to the bathroom it's a pleasure. Is that a great pleasure? Something we fan of? Some people do, Every time we say, well, you don't take it for granted, right? But it's a pleasure. We could argue that. It's the only pleasure that has the same nature of spiritual pleasure, wherein after the activity is done, you feel better, or you still feel good. It has some sort of lasting. It's not eternal, it's not forever, but it's in some small way similar. It's a measure of the world to come. It's something slightly similar. It's not the full thing, but the idea of a pleasure that goes on and continues, that's Olam Haba, that's forever, right, is in some small way in this world comparable to going to the bathroom. That's the only thing. Yeah. What about Tashmish Amita, intercourse? Well, that's also a pleasure, but then afterwards, there's the aftereffect. You get weak, right? So that's not. And go ahead.
Would you say it's just about a mitzvah?
Well, a mitzvah. Remember, that's a good question. But what pleasure do you have of a mitzvah? Is that your body? Is that a bodily pleasure? Is that a this world pleasure? Is that a next world pleasure?
Shabbos meal then.
Yeah, but what's the real pleasure of a mitzvah? That's your soul having a pleasure. That's a nice little. What you're bringing up is a little loophole. This is a loophole. That the question is it possible to have next world's pleasure in this world? I don't want to wait till after I die and after we get resurrected in Mashiach. I don't want to wait till then. I want to have it now. My mind talks about this great pleasure that supersedes all the pleasures in this world. Is it possible to get it in this world? Is it possible for us to get it today or tomorrow or this week or here on terra firma? What you're saying is that maybe we could tap into the spiritual pleasures via doing a mitzvah, and then you don't feel. Then you have that kind of lasting feeling. Loopholes, huh? You see, I agree with you. I agree with you, but that wouldn't necessarily fulfill the quality. We're saying that wouldn't fulfill the criteria of this particular piece of Talmud. This Talmud is looking for things in this world that are this worldly, like the sun or Shabbat that we experience with our bodies, right? Or going to the bathroom. It's a physical thing that share a commonality, even a small commonality with the world to come. So what you're saying is that, well, hey, you know what? If someone does a mitzvah, well, then you feel good afterwards, right? But perhaps the pleasure that you feel of doing a mitzvah is not a physical pleasure. Obviously, it's not. There's no physical pleasure that you get. Your body doesn't feel it. It's a spiritual pleasure. You feel good within yourself, Maybe that's your soul living a little bit like Olam Haba, in a slight way, which is a crazy thought, that it's possible to tap into this wonderful pleasure that we talk about, even in this world. We don't have to wait for Olam Haba. Pretty incredible. And in fact, you're 1,000% right. 1,000% right. And I'll read you in the modern work on Musar, Path of the Just, starts off with the question of what's the purpose of it all. That's what he does. That's what he says.
It's a great read.
Dude, but just the first two paragraphs, very, 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 very famous. Right at the beginning of Lutzata. So he says like this: Ha'adam lo nivra ella. Can someone finish this? Lihit aneg al Hashem. Man was only created to have pleasure of God, have spiritual pleasure. I'm gonna need you to hear, pay attention here. I'm gonna do some callbacks here. Ready? Adam lo nivra ela lihit aneg al Hashem. Man is created for the sole purpose of having the pleasure of God. Shezehu hata'anud ha'amiti. For this is the true pleasure. V'ha'idun hagadol mikol idunim. And the greatest idun. How would you translate idun? Pleasure. It's another word for pleasure. In Hebrew, there's two words for pleasure. Ta'anug and idun. Right? Ta'anug and idun, right? We have two Hebrew speakers. They both nod in their heads. Right? Huh? Like an Nathan, that's right. Man is created for the pleasure of God. What's that pleasure? That's the ta'anug ha'amiti, the real ta'anug, the real pleasure, and the greatest idun, the greatest, also another word of pleasure. And then he says as follows: V'hine, makom ha'ta'anug hazeh hu olam haba. The place of this ta'anug is olam haba. The place of this pleasure is olam haba. Olam haba is designed for having the pleasure. Now, if we read this word very critically, he's saying something amazing, which, Brad, you actually hinted to. What's he saying?
What? Islam.
That was the bad.
Very good. Islam.
Olam
Oh,
Islam.
Oh, Islam Haba. Wow. So it says like this. I know this is somewhat of a critically analyzing the text here. He says that Olam Haba is two things. It's a great ta'anud and a great idun. Or he says, the pleasure that we're created for is to have this pleasure of God, which is the ta'anud and idun. Two words for pleasure in Hebrew. And then he says, the place of this ta'anud is Olam Haba. And he only uses one of those words that he described as having this pleasure. And that's the question. Wait a minute. If you say the pleasure of God is a true ta'anud, the real true pleasure, and the true idun, well, then why would you say the place of this ta'anud using only one of those words? Clearly, what he's indicating is that in this world, on planet Earth, Olam Hazeh, there is a way to achieve this great pleasure as well. We don't have to wait for Olam Haba. We don't have to wait for the next world. And I feel like the crowd is getting antsy, so I'll just say very quickly that if you look, and it's highly advisable, if you could find your hands on a Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of mitzvahs of Maimonides, and go to mitzvah number 3, right? You have it all in your hands. Right? Go to mitzvah number 3, which is the mitzvah of V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, you shall love Hashem your God. He literally says word for word what this Ramchal is saying, what the Lutzato is saying, and he tells you how to do it. Thus, if you want to have this greatest pleasure that ever existed, the highest level of pleasure, the pleasure that you were created for, or you, when I say you, means all of mankind, the pleasure that's really designed to be in full force in Olam Haba, if you want to have it in this world, you want to know how to do it? Go to Rambam, go to Sefer, to the book of mitzvot, one of the major works of the Rambam, right? Go to mitzvah number 3 and read it. And he'll tell you then how to do it. Once you have, but I will tell you as a caveat, before you do that, once you do that, you can never come back.
It's the blue pill.
You're giving up the blue pill, exactly. You're giving up something. Okay, And what are you giving up? I'll read you the last quote of the Rambam, and then I'll let you guys go. I could tell you guys want to run away. I don't know. I feel antsiness. I'm antsy as well. Maybe I'm just feeling myself. So, this is once again from the Rambam in that treatise that we talked about. Men who choose to purify themselves will reach the spiritual height. They will neither experience bodily pleasures, nor will they want it. What the Rambam is telling you is that if you go down this path, if you want to have the spiritual pleasures, you want to go to mitzvah number 3 in the book of mitzvahs and actually get what Lutzato was talking about, the Rambam was talking about, get the next world's pleasures in this world.
You have to become a eunuch.
No. You will neither experience it won't do it for you anymore. The bodily pleasure, you won't even want it. You lose your desire for it. Because why? They will resemble a powerful king. He would hardly want to go back to playing ball with children on the floor like he did before he became king. Such games were exciting for him when he was a child and was unable to understand the real difference between playing ball and having the pleasure of being a monarch. Like children, we now praise and glorify the pleasures of the body and do not understand the pleasures of the soul. What he's telling you is, once you go and follow his recipe, Maimonides' bits of theory, I can tell what it is. You follow that, you're essentially giving up. You're giving up something. Why? Because no longer will the pleasures and delights of the sizzling steak entice you. That doesn't do it for you at all. You have zero interest in that. You know, that's not appealing to you. It's like you want to go and play games and dig in the sandbox with your hands. No, you matured from that, right? You'll mature and advance in what's exciting and pleasurable for you, but you'll have to give up something that won't do it for you anymore. You like the king. You know, the king doesn't want to play with his friends' marbles on the floor like they did when they were kids. That's not exciting for him anymore.
But I don't know the source, but I thought someone prayed to take away, idols, whatever.
Promiscuity?
God said, no, can't take that away. That's what you're talking about. Taking away the urge of...
Well, that's the Yetzer Hara. That's the Talmud in 2 places, once in Yuma and once in Sanhedrin, where it says that they prayed to get rid of the urge for idolatry, and they saw it was like a fiery lion that emerged from the temple, and they said, hey, what the heck, once we're doing this, why don't we get rid of the desire for adultery? Yeah. And they got rid of it. And then 3 days later, they saw that even the chickens stopped hatching eggs. And they realized, well, this has a very vital function, because if you want the world to continue, you have to have that passion has to exist. So what they did was, instead they made a compromise. They prayed that people shouldn't have a desire for incest. People shouldn't crave like their sisters.
I heard it different.
Well, that's what the Talmud says. So
really.
100%. Give you the sources.
No, that's interesting. I heard it.
That's the source.
They prayed, and God said, "Okay, we'll take away this, but we won't take away that."
Well, no, that's not how. Well, I'm not trying to argue with what you saw. I don't know what you did see, but we could go to the sources. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not.
It's possible.
Unlikely.
So the modern version for my money is third mitzvah is once you go black, you never go back, right?
Once you go what? Something like that. Okay, I don't know what you just said, but
yeah, in the modern.
Once you try it, you won't go back, right? That's
try what?
That's third.
No, what he's telling you is that it won't appeal to you anymore.
Right, you'll be
right.
So once you try
Thus, yes. So thus, in conclusion, I think we could say that this Talmud that started off as being very bizarre, very peculiar, very odd, very strange, and very cryptic. It says something about Olam Haba and compared it in the sun and Shabbat. It doesn't seem to have rooted in there's no structure to it. What's the lesson? It seems very strange to us. But once we spend time with it, we understand it. We look at all the other sources. We find a lot of tremendous lessons about life, about Olam Haba, about Shabbat, about what it is that we're here for. All these incredible things, and I think if that's the only lesson that we come away with, that the words of the Talmud are highly measured, and the details and the exact words that they use are there for a purpose, and everything that they're telling us for a reason, and we might not see it, but it's there. If that's what we came out with, then great, and that's, I think, wonderful. And if we came out with some other insights on life, that's also fantastic. Either way, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
That was great. Okay, now we can start the Torah class.
Yeah, let's go. We've done the introduction. That's right.
Syria, right? Syria.